Where do you live, Bern?
At 36 Wall Street, Hoosick Falls. I've been a resident of Hoosick Falls my entire life.
Great. And tell us a little about your what you did in Hoosick Falls before you went to the service.
Well, I was a student in Hoosick Falls High School, graduating in 1942, and all the graduates of any high school in the United States for 1942, 43, 44, or 45 didn't have to worry about college entrance exams. There was something waiting for them. Everybody knew that they were going in the military. And I took a PG course after high school, bone up on algebra and things like that, because I wanted to get in the Air Corps. I wanted to fly, and I knew I would need math for that. So I went back, took a PG course, just waiting for my number.
I see. And then what happened?
Well, in March, my number came up, so I was inducted into the service with a bunch of other fellows from Hoosick Falls, and my first stop was...
Well, do you remember any of the guys that went down with you at all?
Mason Harrison was one of them. Now, he's the only one that stands out, but I'm sure there's a lot.
Yeah, sure, I'm sorry, but Mason did.
Yeah, well, Mason was in the same graduating class with me, so
I see.
That kind of stuck out.
Okay, then what happened after they...
Well, I went down to Fort Dix first, and first job in there was moving a coal pile that somebody probably had moved the day before from one place to another just to keep us busy. And every time I went before anybody in an interview or anything else, I kept stressing, I want to go in the Air Force, I want to go in the Air Force. So finally, that's where I ended up. First thing I knew, I was on a train. It took us 3 days to get down to Miami Beach, Florida. And I was stationed at Miami Beach. That's where I took my basic. I was down there for probably 4 or 5 months, and I'd probably still be down there if I didn't tell them where I was. I played a musical instrument, the alto horn, in the high school band. So one day they come around and they said, we need somebody to play the troops in and out when they come off the field. So I could play a bugle. So they said, okay, you can play a bugle. So they transferred me to another hotel, and I was in the band unit. And somehow they lost my records. Well, there was no problem going to chow line, but when it come time to get paid, there was no record to pay me. So I had to go and tell them where I was finally. So after about 3 months of basic training, I shipped out of there. I went to Presbyterian College in Clinton, South Carolina. And I stayed there for about 4 months, I guess.
Was that a cadet program?
That was a cadet program. I was in that. And then at that time, this was, probably mid to late 1943. We did some flying in small single-engine Luscombe planes there, training there. But then they determined they had enough pilots already in training. What they needed was gunners, radio operators, and mechanics, because they were gearing up for the 4-engine bomber. As any student of history knows, if Germany had had a 4-engine bomber, they probably would have knocked out Britain, and the whole course of the war would have been changed. But Britain didn't have a 4-engine bomber, and England didn't have a 4-engine bomber, and England finally realized they needed a 4-engine bomber, and so did we. So this is why they started the 4-engine bomber program. They had the B-24, which was a heck of a good ship, and it did a heck of a good job, and it could carry more bombs than the B-17. But it was limited in the range it could go, the height it could go, the speed it was go, and the amount of armament it had. So they built the Flying Fortress.
I see, and that's a picture one right up
That's
there.
That's a picture one up there. And it's aptly named because it had guns all over the place. And it was my, I don't know, can you get that in your camera?
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, we'll take the time.
This was my position, right here, the radio room, right back in the bomb bay. And as you can see, it had a chin turret here, it had cheek turrets here, it had a ball turret you can just barely see there, it had waist guns here, it had a top turret here. These were all twins, and a tail turret. So it was aptly named. It was a Flying Fortress, and the Germans soon learned to respect it. And with the adaptation of the formation flying, where they had the high, the low, and the lead elements, they had like a box formation, and fighters couldn't penetrate it very well.
How many in a group would fly out? I mean, would you
Well, there'd
say-
be the high, low, and the lead element, and each one of the groups would probably consist of maybe about 30 to 40 planes, but then there would be a whole division. There was three divisions, the first, the second, and the third division. Ours was the third division had a block L on the tail. The other divisions, one of them had a diamond, and I can't recall what the other division had. But anyway, this would make up the group until the advent of the fighter planes could only go so far and protect us. They called them our little friends. They could only go so far until they developed the wing tanks for their added fuel. So when they developed the wing tanks, then they could go deeper in with us. And if we went to Berlin, for example, the fighters couldn't go all the way. But if we went just inside of Germany or things like that, the fighters with their tanks could go with us most of the way. In the event that they were jumped by German planes, they would drop their tanks and their maneuverability.
All right, let's go back now. You're in Miami.
Yep. Okay, we got out.
You went to South Carolina, to Presbyterian College, and
Yeah.
then they were getting you ready for this flying fortress.
Right. Well, no, at that time I was studying to be a cadet.
Oh, I see.
But they determined they had enough pilots.
Yeah,
And so they sent me to Nashville, and they did what should I say, like a study or something. And I had to make a choice. I go to engineer or radio or gunnery. Well, gunnery, you would go straight in, you go to about 6 or 8 weeks of gunnery, and you go right from there to combat. So I said, well, I ought to learn something first. I ought to either go to engineering or radio. So I always liked radio, so that's where I went. I went to radio, I went to Scott Field. I took that, Scott Field, Illinois. And while I was there, I can recall very vividly, I didn't know what the heck was going on, but Scott Field was one of the places where they were doing an awful lot of glider work. So this was in preparation for D-Day. Of course, I didn't know this at the time. And they were hooking onto gliders and towing them and everything else at Scott Field. And I knew something big was coming, but I didn't know what it was. Well, I finished my radio course, qualified as a radio operator, and then I had to go to gunnery anyway. So I went to Yuma, Arizona. So we went to Yuma, took our gunnery, air to air, air to ground. We'd shoot at targets with a 50 caliber that would tow behind the plane. And after that, I went to, after gunnery, I graduated from there sometime in mid to late 44. Dates get a little bit hazy at this year. So, and then I went from there to Lincoln, Nebraska, and that's where our crew was formed. And coincidentally, our crews, you could see, they were formed alphabetically. Like there was myself, Graney, there was Ginger, Heineman, Hunt. Yeah, they were all
They did it alphabetically.
G's or H, yeah, they did it alphabetically. So we formed as a crew, and we went from there to Alexandria, Louisiana, to a base, and we trained on B-17s. And I can always remember down there, while we were training, one of the B-17s crashed, and all the crew was killed. So just like horseback riding, the first thing you do, they took everybody out after the plane crashed, get in the air again. So you had to get in the air again, because if they figure if they give you time to think about it,
You'd be chicken.
you're going to be chicken. You're not going to do it. So we trained at Alexander, did smoke bombing and things like that. And the first thing you know, we were qualified, I guess, to go overseas. And they formed our group. The group that we were going to be part of was the 452nd Bomb Group. That was formed originally in Washington, D.C., or Washington State, but then they moved from there to Rapid City, South Dakota. And they went from there overseas. They went by boat over there, but then to get the planes over there, we picked up a plane. Now I can't recall exactly where we picked it up. Whether we must have picked it up at Alexandria, Louisiana. Anyway, we flew over, and I can remember going over upstate New York, looking down, seeing the mountains, and Maine, and we landed at Goose Bay, Labrador, and then the next stop was Iceland. We stopped at Reykjavik, Iceland, up there. And from there, we landed in Wales, over in England, left the plane wherever it was at a station there, and took the train and went to the base where we were stationed, which was in East Anglia, which is the eastern part of England. It was the 452nd Bomb Group. We were just outside of Attleboro, in Norwich, in England. and we flew all our missions out of there.
Yeah, then you started doing missions. Now, would you tell us a little about what your first, the first mission, not just
Well, I don't remember
what
that.
kind were they giving you? I mean, where were you going?
Well, we went all the way from probably some of our deepest penetration. I remember December 5th, 1944, we went to Berlin, Germany, and I can remember going in on the IP. We were going to get to the initial point. We were going about 300 and some miles an hour. We had a hell of a tailwind going in. Well, we did a 180-degree turn, and we come out the other way, and we must have been making about 60 or 70 miles a mile ground speed. And the flak gunners had a field day because we were just about standing still coming out of there. Yeah. But I don't remember the exact first mission.
I know, but I'm just saying your missions were usually in France and Germany and that area?
Yeah, France and Germany.
I see. How many missions did you do, Mark?
35.
35 missions.
We were a lucky crew, really. We had nobody, and all the time we were on there wounded. We did come home one time on two engines out on one side. I can remember we were throwing the machine guns, we were throwing everything out into the channel to lighten the load so we could get home. We just barely made it home. And when we got back, they wanted a court-martial on the engineer because it was one of his jobs to check the tail wheel. There was a light that indicated that the tail wheel was down. Well, that was his job to check that. And he checked it, but somehow the tail wheel malfunctioned. And the plane come down and we skidded off to the side of the runway. But they come to find out, and what did they find in the mechanism of the tail wheel? But they found a 50 caliber bullet.
So there was a good reason.
There was a good reason for the malfunction.
All right, then what happened? You did your 35 missions?
Well, we did our 35 missions, and then, of course, it was getting towards the end of the war then. We finished up April 7th, 1945, and believe it or not, the April 7th, 45 was the worst mission I think that we ever had, and that was our 35th. We looked, the plane on our left side, I can still see it very vividly. I was shooting at fighters out the waist window, and this one fighter came in, and he came right straight broadside to us, and I could look down and I could see the pilot. He was like hunched over. Now whether he was wounded or not, I don't know, but he missed us by inches. He came right underneath like this, and when he did, he pulled up on the other side, and he hit, well, right underneath here.
Wait,
on the plane adjacent to us. He came right up underneath here, and that plane just broke right apart. Now, I didn't actually witness this. The other waist gunner on the other side, all I can remember is saying, "Oh my God," and the whole thing just fell apart. The ironical part about it is that plane that went down, that was on the left side of us, was the one we commonly referred to. It was named Snake Eyes. It was an older plane. It was a B-17E, I think. It wasn't even an F. The later ones with a chin turret were called a G model. But that was our favorite plane, and somehow we wanted to fly that plane. We had petitioned group to fly the plane, but they wouldn't let us because we were lead element, and they said you should have a newer model plane. Well, ironically, as I say, that plane went down, and everybody was lost on that plane. To the best of my knowledge, nobody ever saw any chutes come out of it or anything else.
And what do you mean by the lead group?
Well, you had to have somebody that was the leader of the group, and then the rest of them were stacked behind it, and they all kind of followed the leader. Now, and most of the times when they dropped their bombs all on the lead plane. The lead bombardier would sight in on the target, and the rest of them would be all poised, and the minute they saw his bombs go, they would release their bombs. So they did like a saturation bombing.
I see. Now, I want to pull you back here, and would you explain your uniform to us and what's on it and everything? Let me see if I got a good picture of it. And yeah, perfect.
Okay, well, of course, this is the 8th Air Force patch. This was my rank, which was technical sergeant then. They've all changed now.
Yeah.
And this was the wings of a gunner, and the blue, I'm not exactly sure what the blue is, but I think it was just like the combat infantry's badge. These were my campaign ribbons, the air medal with 5 clusters, and the good conduct, and the ETO with 3 battle stars. And this was a unit citation that the group received for participating in a particular mission. I believe it was a shuttle mission to Russia, but I'm not positive. And this, I think you're probably familiar with, that's the old ruptured duck.
Yeah, right.
And this was the radio patch. That signified that I was a radio operator.
I see.
Other than that, the rest of it, I guess, are the standard U.S. and the Air Force.
Tell us how that would fit today.
The only thing that fits is a sleeve length. I weighed about 156 pounds, I think, when I come out in 1945, and right now I probably weigh about 190. So there is a large gap around the middle.
Yeah, it was good that you were small. If you're in the gunner spaces there, they were kind of small, weren't they? How about the hat you got there,
well,
Bert?
that's the typical enlisted man's hat.
Yeah.
That was a good grade hat. I purchased that in St. Louis, I recall. And it doesn't have the 50 mission crush because you can recall seeing the pilots with that from wearing the earphones, but when you're flying at 30,000 feet, you don't wear that kind of a hat. You have the Snoopy helmet on and the goggles and the oxygen mask and everything else.
I see. All right, so you flew your 35 missions, you had points, and you came home. Is that what happened?
Basically I went to Southampton, England when we waited around there, and we had an interesting event on the way back. A submarine surrendered to our convoy. We were on the water, I think, May 8th or May 9th on the way back when the war was officially declared over. And the submarine, I can remember them dropping depth charges to the submarine, and I think it surrendered to our convoy, but I'm not positive.
I see.
And we'll come back to the state, and then we had an automatic furlough for, I can't recall how long, probably a week, 2 weeks, something like that. And I went from there to Atlantic City, and that was like a rest home. I can remember the jitneys and going up and down the boardwalk and everything. I haven't been back there since. I have no indication to go there now. There's a gambling resort.
You don't like to gamble.
And then after that, I went to Randolph Field in Texas. And I really would have almost liked to have signed up for B-29s and gone to the Pacific, but I just said,
after 35 missions,
no sense pushing your luck. I said I'm going to sit here comfortable, and then with the advent of the atomic bomb and everything else, you could see that the end was coming.
Would you tell us about the machine gun you brought?
Well, this is an early model German machine gun. I'd like to say I took it off a dead German, but I didn't. It was I picked it up in England. A party had brought it back, and they didn't want to bother with the paperwork that was required to take it back. So they offered it to me, so I said, oh, sure, I'll take it. So I filled out the necessary paperwork, and it still works, but the FBI came after I'd filled the paperwork, and they welded the inside the bore so that you can't use it as a machine gun. So, but it makes a interesting souvenir, and there's a little story that goes with that too. One time, St. Mary's had a play up here, and somehow they needed a gun like this, and I let the kids take the gun. My children were at school at the time, and somehow the kids were walking down the street with a machine gun, and the police car happened to see him. So I got a call in the middle of the night. Did you let the kids take the machine gun? I said, yes, I did, but you know, it's not operational. It won't work as a gun. So that was just a little humor.
That is funny. All right, so then what happened? You were waiting around then to get your discharge out of Randolph? Or?
Yes, I did. I got my, they came out with a point system, and I had enough points to get out. So I had two options. I could either go to a point closer to home and be discharged, or be discharged there, and then they would pay my rail fare home. So I elected to be discharged there. So I processed the forms and picked up my discharge and got my travel money and came home here to Hoosick Falls. And my mother had died in 1942, so my father and brother and sister were keeping house. So when I come back, I kind of pitched in. My father run a general repair business, a welder, steam fitter, things like that. So I was working with him up to the point that he got killed in an automobile accident in 1947. So I was all set to go to school to become a welder under the GI Bill of Rights. I had all the paperwork done and everything else. Then a job came up in the post office. So I took that and I stayed there for, well, I went in 47 in the post office and got out in 85, so almost 40 years.
Great. Yeah. And then you married, and were you married when you were in the service?
No,
or
I wasn't.
You got married after you came
I was
home?
married after I came home. I didn't meet my wife until, I better watch my step here. I think it was 1947, a Christmas party. She worked in the undergarment at the time, and we were married on August 5th, 1950, so we went together about 3
I
years.
see. How many children do you
We had
have?
6 children.
6 children.
6 children, yeah.
Do any of them live in town, or?
Yes, my son Bernard lives right, he built a house behind me. He lives in town. The rest of them are scattered all over. Michael is in Honey Eye Falls, just south of Rochester. Barbara is in Miami, Florida. Rosemary is in Clifton Park. Joseph is in Falls Village, Connecticut. And Patrick, Patrick just recently finished a stint in the Air Force. He put in 20 years in the Air Force as a maintenance ground person on the lines and everything else. And now he's down in Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, and he's working on aircraft down there, basically doing the same thing he did in the service at a better rate of pay.
Yeah, right.
So
I
I
see.
think I got them all, didn't I?
Yeah, right. I think so. And now you did have some. You did run for. You did become mayor,
Yes,
if I
I was
remember right.
mayor for 2 years here in Hoosick Falls. I enjoyed that very much. I don't like the political end of it. You know, if you could just do a good job and let it go at that. But I looked up the definition of a politician in the dictionary one time, and I decided I didn't want to be one.
I see. Well, but I know you got elected. That was something
Yeah,
because
it was,
it's a good
and-
pat on your back.
And I think we accomplished a lot at the time.
I remember. Well, is there anything else you'd like to talk about or anything before we say goodbye? You gave us a great interview.
Well,
we learned a lot about you.
I hope so. I just hope that the younger people today. I know there's been a lot with Tom Brokaw and the
Yeah.
Greatest Generation and all this. Well,
There's 2 or 3 books out.
I don't like to think of the fact that I don't think we saved the world or anything. The opportunity was there, the time was there, we were there. It's what had to be done. Nobody looked at himself as a hero, whether you were in the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines. None of them won the war single-handedly. But I do firmly believe if the 4-engine bomber hadn't been used, the war would have lasted much longer and could have definitely had a different outcome. Nobody realizes how close Germany came to defeating us with their V-1 rockets, their V-2 rockets, and had Hitler worked on the atomic bomb as industrious as we had, and if he had developed that, that's why I firmly believe, I guess there's a God over there looking over this country. And this country it better get, well, I don't want to sound religious, but they shouldn't shun God. I don't like what I see in the paper now where they're trying to take it out of the schools, out of the courts, and what should I say?
Right. Good you expressed your opinion about it. Look, one last question. How old were you during this time when you were flying these missions?
20.
20 years old.
That's interesting because when my youngest son went off to college, he went all the way out to Iowa, and he was driving out there, and he was 19 years old. And I thought, he's too young to be going out like that.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, you damn fool, you were only 20 and you were overseas.
Right. Well, gee, Bern, thanks a lot for coming down and bringing everything. We really appreciate it.